And the question has arisen lately, is there room for a third category of device in the middle? Something that's between a laptop and a smartphone.
The middle line between phone and computer is what the iPad was made for. And when the first iPad Pro was announced, that initial vision didn't make sense. It was a giant screen with a blown up phone operating system that wasn't in the middle of anything. But enter the current generation iPad Pro, been out for a year. Apple's vision for what that product can be is finally coming into focus. So before the second generation iPad Pro came out now a year ago, pretty much every iPad from 2010 up until last year looked identical. And that made this generation iPad Pro seem so different than the previous generations. It was a completely new design, had thin bezels, it felt premium. I think it's one of the best looking Apple products they've ever made. So I love the way the iPad Pro feels in the hand. Sometimes I take it out of the case just to hold it. I think it feels really good. It was plagued with some bending issues. I haven't had any of those problems. When we filmed our Apple alternate history video and we had the iPad up on the pedestal, it wasn't in a case and it got kind of bumped and it fell. And my heart sank with it. And all I had was just a tiny little scratch in the upper corner. And that's been my only experience with dropping the iPad. But from that experience, it does seem pretty durable. So obviously the iPad is more than some of its parts, but those parts are still very impressive, but not perfect. I love having Face ID on everything. I say Face ID all the things. I know that I'm in the minority here, but my experience with Face ID on the iPad Pro has been significantly worse than my experience on Face ID on the iPhones, really since any generation that it's had it, going back to the iPhone 10. When I'm in bed watching it at night, it doesn't often work, or I gotta sort of hold it up or lock and try to unlock it a few different times. Usually I end up just putting in the passcode. So that's been a miss for me. I know I've talked a lot about how much I like higher refresh rates on phones. After using the iPad Pro with 120 hertz refresh rate, honestly, I don't notice it anymore. It's a really good screen. I don't take it outside nearly as often as I would like a phone, but when I'm trying to watch movies on an airplane, usually gotta turn the brightness all the way up, and once I do, I can see pretty much everything. I take it with me when I come to the studio here to film. It's how I review scripts and edit notes. And I'm now starting using the Apple Pencil more to edit and annotate notes, sort of go through and know what I want to say on these videos. I haven't really used the Apple Pencil before, really had much of a need for it. And when I'm sitting at home working on the weekends, I'll alternate between putting on the keyboard case and taking that keyboard case off. And it's been really helpful and useful to have. I have really loved having USB-C on the iPad Pro, and it comes back to convenience. When I travel, I can generally carry just one cable or one power brick. I can plug in USB Type-C thumb drives. I can just do everything that I would want to do. I can plug in monitors at USB Type-C. It doesn't really give me that much more than what Lightning did, but it has made things a lot easier. It makes less bulk when I travel, and one cable to do everything has been nice, and it makes me excited for USB-C coming to the iPhone. Every time I got to plug in a Lightning cable into my iPhone, it can't help but feel a little bit annoyed. So while the hardware on the iPad have always been good, it's kind of been software that's been holding it back. Really nice physical devices, but just using a phone operating system. But now we've got iPad OS on this hardware that's really premium, but a year old. And with iPad OS, we finally have a path forward for the iPad. So if you think about the iPad Pro being out for a year, iPad OS has only been out for like 2.5 months, so it's still a very new experience. And it's brought with it, on the software side, a lot of things that have improved my iPad usage and have sort of made it more of a computer and less of just a media consumption tablet. So desktop Safari has been absolutely amazing. And I know that you can use other browsers in desktop mode, but desktop Safari has been absolutely perfect. And I should preface it with, I don't use Safari for anything else. I'm generally a Chrome user, but being able to have that desktop experience for the YouTube Studio has been almost work-changing. I can now check analytics in real time. I can check stats. I can do things that I couldn't do through the dedicated Studio app. They would have to go to a computer for. So I've really liked having that. There's been some other use cases, but for me, the YouTube Studio has been huge on the iPad. And if there's one area on iPad software that was in desperate need for an update, it was a home screen. And it got like a tiny little one. You've got some more icons there. You can have widgets on the home screen. It's still missing a ton of stuff that it needs. Being able to move icons anywhere you want would be huge. But it also brought things like improved multitasking. So that's been nice to have things split screen, have sort of apps almost floating on the side. I use that a lot. Oftentimes I'll watch YouTube videos and have my email up on the side. It's been nice to have. While those things have been really good, the welcome additions and have helped my workflow, it's certainly not been bug-free. I have weird screen rotation issues where the screen will rotate if I'm not moving it and the dock will stay in one spot. I had to stop using the mail app that ships with iPad OS because it just didn't work. It wouldn't pull a new mail for me. I keep having to pull it down to refresh and it just wasn't working. So things like that have made it less than a perfect experience, let's say, but as far as software can go, it's still been close to awesome. And as the iPad kind of finds its own way, more developers are taking note. We now have like actual Photoshop for the iPad. You can edit videos with iMovie or LumaFusion built in. If you're willing to change your workflow, to change how you work, you can get most things done on an iPad Pro. And I think that's been the most pleasant surprise. When Apple launched their commercials with the little girl saying, "What's a computer?" I think everybody kind of cringed. It was a tablet. It was a big iPhone. It was great for watching movies on an airplane, but not much else. But now it's good for a lot else. I find myself editing all of my documents on this, creating documents on it, managing my spreadsheets for the business, all on the iPad Pro. And when I come to the studio, I don't bring my laptop with me anymore. And that's a new experience. I find myself using my computer at home less and less because I can do more and more with the iPad. And it's funny how the iPad is kind of becoming more of a computer, being able to use a mouse and a keyboard. The hallmarks of a desktop PC brought to something this mobile has even made it more so of an easy transition. Now, iPad OS is certainly not perfect, but what I like about iPad OS as it is now there's a clear path for the iPad to get better. It's not stuck and married to what's on the current generation iPhone on a larger screen. I imagine generation over generation we'll see a divergence on what iPad OS does versus what iOS is going to do. And I love that there's a way forward for the iPad Pro, that it can sort of blaze its own path. And maybe we're 2 or 3 or even more generations away from getting to that ultimate mobile computer tablet hybrid. But where we are right now, still very impressive.